Yes, Bharat.
Sorry, I was on a mute. All right, fair enough. So Nikita, have you gone through the day one slides, and if you have any queries in that?
I have gone through it and I'm good.
So let's look at today's agenda. We will look at the service provider levels and the reporting requirements for them. We will introduce the SAQs, which is a self-assessment questionnaire as well, as prescribed by the PCI Security Standards Council. We will also look at a very high level on the PADSS applicability for the PCI zone or the environment. We will also look at key roles and responsibilities from different entities' perspective in slightly more detail. And then we will look at the determination of the scope as well. And I was also working on the extract from the report from a business process standpoint, which we will talk at the end of this session, wherein I will walk you through how we form a scope determination at a business process level. So we will look at some of the business processes, a documentation of that, and how we have kind of bifurcated the in scope versus out of scope at a business level. Okay.
Yeah, fine. So,
Uh,
Paras, how this course will be
yeah.
beneficial for my career? I have seen few openings, like every opening is like 8 plus, 9 plus years of thing. They have the openings in the market.
Hmm. So what happened when you talk about any compliance and a risk role?
Okay,
So it is irrespective whether, so first of all, the experience is needed depending upon the position.
okay,
So for instance, if you are looking for a senior security advisor role, the experience would be in accordance to that. I
okay.
know, for example, there's an oil and gas company in Bangalore,
Mm-hmm.
and they continuously look out for individual having a minimum experience of 3 years,
Okay,
and it can range up to 10, 12 years as well. So they look at the individual between 3 to 12 year of experience.
okay,
Now, what happens when anybody gets interviewed at a 3 year experience level? There are certain aspects that people look out for. A, the knowledge, which is absolute. Then, secondly, the personality of an individual as well, from an interpersonal skills perspective. For
okay,
example, how open you are, how much articulative you are, how much confident you are when you are speaking, what kind of
okay.
a wearing sense you have, whether you will be able to represent, for example, any consulting firm to the client. So,
Mm-hmm.
from your wearing perspective. So,
Okay,
those are certain aspects as well, which goes into the interview from an assessment standpoint.
okay.
The third aspect is there, which is on your learning curve as well, or your willingness to learn new things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay,
many organizations, when they interview, even if you are not aware about any per topic, let's say, then they are fine with it till the time you have that zeal and you have that willingness to learn that new topic as well.
okay.
Right? So typically, what we prefer or what we suggest is A, you should have a knowledge. That is
Mm.
a must.
Okay,
Second, while we will work through these topics and we will get more, I would say, to these discussion topics, we will also look at certain presentations, which we will be creating together to make sure you have that clarity about that particular agenda or that particular topic. So, for example, if we are covering PCI right now,
mm-hmm.
we will be at a later stage, we will be creating a presentation which will relate back to, let's say, planning of the audit. We will work on the presentation from a client presentation perspective at a meeting. We will
Okay,
look at a closing meeting presentation as well. So that
okay.
will give you a end-to-end concept from a knowledge perspective as well as from a requisite experience perspective. Now,
Mm-hmm.
coming back to your question, wherein you are looking for certain positions which have like 8, 9 years of experience as an expectation, there are certain positions wherein you will still be a lesser experience as a requirement, and people are absolutely okay with considering you.
Okay. Yeah, got
Okay,
it.
so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so from that perspective, I think it should not be an issue.
Okay, fine. Got it. Got it, Paris.
Okay,
Yeah.
and don't worry on your interview as well. I have couple of good connects where I can position your CV and the candidature, and I'm pretty hopeful that with your candidature you will be able to get there as well.
Okay. Thanks for that.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So service provider level. Now, in the last discussion, what we have seen is the merchant level. So depending upon the number of transactions a particular merchant has, if consolidated in a year, they are segregated into level 1 to level 4, depending upon what program that they support, whether it's with American Express, MasterCard, Visa, JCB, or Discover. Now, from a service provider perspective, even the service providers are categorized in a level 1, 2, and 3. And for the purpose of service provider, you can consider BPO as one of the service provider, wherein there is a huge amount of transactions that they support on behalf of the banks. And we will, at the end of the session, we will look at one such scenario as well. Then another kind of a service provider is who maintains that particular application of payment wherein your authorization or settlement are taking place. So organizations like ElectraCard who host the payment gateway on their infrastructure, which is being supported by them, will be considered under this particular level. So ElectraCard would be a service provider to XYZ bank, and the bank being an acquirer or an issuer, they will be liable for the compliance of their service provider as well. Now, from a categorization perspective, American Express, MasterCard, and Visa. These three payment brands, they maintain the service provider level and they have a specific ask or categorization for those service providers as well. Discover and JCB, they don't categorize the service provider on the transaction volume. Rather, they say that all the service providers are equal for me, and hence I have one requirement for them to get the audit help. So that's a very, very clear-cut guideline from a Discover and JCB perspective. However, from an American Express, MasterCard, and Visa perspective, they have bifurcated the service providers. So the service provider level 1 from an American Express standpoint are the organizations who are processing over 2.5 million American Express transactions annually. Okay. So that's the categorization or a definition of American Express service provider level 1. MasterCard, Visa, and Visa Europe, they have a similar kind of a transaction expectation, wherein they are saying that any service provider who is storing, transmitting, or processing more than 3 lakh total combined transactions annually, they are the service provider level 1 for them. Okay. And MasterCard additionally says that all the third party, they are service provider 1. So organizations like ElectraCard or organizations like Razorpay, they are all at a service provider level 1 by default, irrespective of the number of transactions that they support. Secondly, thirdly, all the compromised third-party payment processors and the data storage entities. Any compromise, if has been notified to MasterCard or by MasterCard, those service providers will also be considered under the service provider level 1. So that's a guideline from a MasterCard perspective. From a Visa and Visa Europe perspective, they are very clear that anybody who store, transmit, or process greater than 3 lakh transactions annually, they are the service provider level 1. Now, from a service provider level 2 perspective, American Express says service providers processing 50,000 to 2.5 million annually, those will be categorized as service provider level 2. Whereas in MasterCard, Visa Inc. and Visa Europe perspective, anybody doing less than 3 lakh transaction or supporting less than 3 lakh transaction will be considered as a service provider level 2. Now, MasterCard, Visa Inc. and Visa Europe, they don't have a 3-tier service provider level. So they stop at level 1 and level 2 itself. Whereas American Express goes a level beyond and says there is a categorization for service provider level 3 as well, wherein the service providers processing less than 50,000 American Express transactions annually, they will be categorized as level 3. So clear till this point?
Yes.
Now, from a validation standpoint, what American Express and other payment brands says, any service provider who is a level 1, American Express wants an annual on-site assessment to be performed by the QSA, who is a qualified security assessor, or service provider is certified by the CEO, CFO, or Chief Information Security Officer of the service provider. So that's the validation requirement that American Express has. Additionally, the American Express also wants a quarterly network scan to be done by the ASV. So that's another expectation from an American Express standpoint. Discover and JCB, they don't have multi-tier segregation of service provider level. So what they say, any service provider, irrespective of the number of transactions, if they are able to provide me an on-site assessment report from a QSA or a certified report, internal report by their CXOs, then they are good with it. And from a scanning perspective, they also need a quarterly network scan by an ASV, both JCB and Discover. So they have a commonality from a validation need perspective. From a MasterCard, Visa Inc. and Visa Europe perspective, they have 2 points in common, wherein they are also requiring a external or an independent assessment by a QSA. So they are not okay with a CEO, CFO, or CISO certification, but they want only a QSA to perform an audit and give a client. So that's the that's a requirement which cut across all the 3 payment brands. Then another common requirement that all the 3 payment brands have is in terms of a network scan by an ASV. ASV is an authorized scanning vendor. So quarterly network scan by an ASV is again a common requirement. Now Visa Inc. and Visa Europe additionally need that any service provider who is providing a service to in-scope merchant or acquirer or issuer, they should also get themselves listed on the respective website of Visa Inc. and Visa Europe. So they have to be on public website as well. From an American Express standpoint on service provider level 2, what they need is an annual self-assessment questionnaire performed by the service provider and certified by the CXOs and a quarterly network scan. So any QSA report in the service provider level 2. Discover JCB doesn't have any service provider level 2 categorization, so no requirement there. And then MasterCard says we need an annual self-assessment questionnaire, and it can be signed by a manager of security as well. So they are not really, behind the CXO's signature on those reports. And additionally, they want a quarterly network scan to be done by the ASV, and then they need a AOC. Now, this AOC form is something which again goes back to your organization leadership. They have to attest that. So that's a AOC form that they need. Then at American Express service provider level 3, they need a self-assessment questionnaire and an external network scan to be done by an ASV on a quarterly basis. And then no need from other validation perspective for the other payment brands. So that's the validation plan, which is in conjunction to the service provider levels that we have. Now, MasterCard says all non-compliant service providers are required to submit a completed MasterCard action plan. So any organization, any service provider for the discussion, if they are identified as a non-compliant service provider, then MasterCard will work with them on the desired action plan, what the service provider needs to do. So MasterCard has taken that authority to govern that action plan. And the service provider will work directly with MasterCard to get those observations or those action points remediated in totality. So that's another need that MasterCard has expressed on the service providers. Okay.
Yes.
Now, from a self-assessment questionnaire perspective, so we have looked at the need of self-assessment questionnaire here. We have looked at the self-assessment questionnaire need here. Or level 2 perspective onwards, we need to file the FAQs. Now, we have different kind of FAQ. So we have FAQ A, we have FAQ EP, we have FAQ B, we have FAQ CVT, C, and D. So what the PCI Security Standards Council says, for every merchant / service provider, depending upon the operations that they do at a business level, they can go for the respective FAQ. FAQ D is the most comprehensive one, but the rest of the FAQs are very tailored to the particular need of service provider. So when we look at FAQ A, it is applicable on a card not present merchant, which is a e-commerce or MOTO. MOTO is mail order, telephone order. So any e-commerce transaction, which is a web-based transaction, or any mail order or a telephone order transaction where card is not physically present, that have fully outsourced all cardholder data function to PCI DSS compliant third-party service provider with no electronic storage, processing or transmission of any cardholder data on the merchant system or premises. Those merchants can go with a FAQ A. So for example, let's say there is a website and the website takes a service from a Razorpay or let's say a PayPal or a Paytm. Now, any transaction that, so let's say it's a jewelry store. So a person goes onto the website, adds the product to the cart, gets to the cart, register themselves, and then they click make a payment. Now, before that button make a payment, if they say order is verified and take me to the payment page, if that situation happens, that will come under AEP, and I'll tell you why. So if my website is there or an e-com where I am not initiating a transaction as well on my website, all the transactions are outsourced to a PCI DSS compliant third-party service provider, which in this case would be a PayPal or a Paytm or a Razorpay. And the website does related information, and it is a fully outsourced model. Then the merchant will fill in the A or a FAQ A. Now, if a merchant is having an e-commerce website, outsourcing the payment processing to a PCI DSS validated third party, and who have a website that does not directly receive cardholder data, but that can impact the security of the payment transaction. They are not storing any, no electronic storage, processing or transmission, then they will be required to fill in the FAQ AP. So just to demonstrate, for example, this also we will see. So let's say there is a website. So let's say I go onto this website and I pick up anything. Let's say this. I pick up this. I add this to the cart. Add this to the cart. View cart. And how do I check out? Check out. Okay. So till now, I am on trivenijewels.com itself, right? I have put in the address and then I say continue shopping. Again, till now, I am on trivenijewels.com itself, so nothing is changing from a website perspective. Now, here if you see this button, which is continue payment, is on trivenijewels.com, which means that it's an e-commerce merchant. If I click on this button, let's say, okay, so if I click on here, it goes to CC Avenue, okay, which means this page or this payment page is totally outsourced to ccavenue.com. So it's the Triveni Jewels is an e-commerce merchant outsourcing to a PCI DSS validated third party. So it's powered by CC Avenue. They have not mentioned whether they are PCI DSS or not, but I believe they are. So they are outsourced to a PCI DSS validated third party who have a website that does not directly receive cardholder data. So because the cardholder data is being entered here, trivenijewels.com doesn't have access to this card number. But that can impact the security of the payment transaction. Yes, it can impact. So for example, if I go back, what will happen if this button, so if I click on this button, I go to CC Avenue, but what will happen if this website gets hacked and once somebody clicks on here, rather than going to CC Avenue, they goes to some hacker page, right? As an end user, I will only see a page asking for my card information. I would not look at whether it's a CC Avenue or CC AVNUE. For me, it's as an end user, it will look like a same to me. So it can impact the security of the cardholder data. Hence, trivenijewels.com will fall under the SAQA-EP because there is a chance that a website getting compromised can impact the security of the cardholder data, even if the function is fully outsourced to a third party. Clear?
Yes, got it.
Oh, perfect. Will not spend money on this. All right. So that's the A and AEP. Now the difference between A and AEP is A is largely applicable for a mail order or a telephone order kind of a merchant where you do not really put in the card number or nobody can impact the security of the card until they have a physical access to that data from a mail order perspective. From a telephone order perspective, there is no storage until or unless the voice recording is getting or the voice communication is getting recorded. If that is not the case, the telephone order is also can be taken as a SAQ-A situation. If the voice recordings or if the voice communications are getting recorded with the cardholder data, then it will not come in SAQ-A. But if the call communication or the calls with the service provider are not getting recorded, or if the cardholder data itself is not getting recorded in the calls, then it will call for a SAQ-A. Okay.
Yeah.
Then we have SAQ-B, which is only applicable for the imprint merchant. So if you, I don't know whether you were born at that time or not, but I remember my earlier days where there used to be people who will be visiting your house, and for the card transactions or for the card verification, once they are delivering the card to you as a owner of the card, they used to uh, keep a white paper on front of the card, a debit or a credit card, and then they used to rub the pencil on top of it. By doing so, they are taking a imprint of the card number on the paper. So if there is a service provider or a merchant who do a imprint work for the card number, then a SAQ-B will be applicable for them.
They still
Okay.
exist?
I don't think so. It still exists because that's against the security. But considering that certain countries may still have this feature. In India, I know that this has been stopped as a practice, but it may
Okay.
exist, for example, in Bangladesh, may exist in country like Philippines. And I'll come
Okay.
to a situation where we'll talk about this. So it
Okay.
may exist in those countries. So hence,
Okay.
from a standard or from a larger framework perspective, they have still kept SAQ-B as one of the options for those merchants who take a imprint of the card.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Then we have a SAQ-CVT. SAQ-CVT is for the merchant who manually enter a single transaction at a time via a keyboard into an internet-based virtual terminal solution that is hosted and hosted by a third party who is a PCI DSS validated one. Now, consider a situation where there is a bank and hosted a server. That server is a POS machine or a virtual terminal solution wherein wherein BPO agent logs in. There is a screen where they manually enter one card number at a time for the transaction. And the bank and the volume of those transactions are less than 50,000, let's say, or less than 1 lakh or million, then the merchant would be required to enter a CVT SAQ. Clear?
Yes, yes.
Now, in a similar situation, if a merchant can enter more than one transaction at a time or inquire one transaction or one card number at a time, more than that, and they have a payment application connected to the internet with no electronic card holder data storage, they will be considered under a SAQ-C. Okay. And for all the merchants which doesn't fall under A, AEP, B, CVT, C, any other merchant, they will have to fill in the SAQ-D. And all the service providers as well will have to fill in the SAQ-D. Okay. So if you look at SAQ-A, AEP, B, CVT, and C, in these cases, either the risk is very low or the power or the influence on the security of the card data is very low, or there are very, very less chances of getting the complete database in a single query. So here we are talking about one single transaction and that too manual, so no automated way. Here we are talking about no electronic cardholder data storage. Here also we are talking about no electronic cardholder data storage. In both of these situations as well, we are saying that the merchant doesn't have access to store, process, or transmit the cardholder data. So the risk in these five merchants at the top, or the category of merchants at the top, the risk is way less compared to somebody who is storing, processing, or transmitting cardholder data, or somebody who is having access to a payment application where the cardholder data can be extracted in. So from that perspective, if you look at these SAQs are subdivided into different categories. Okay, clear?
Yes, Paras.
All right. Now, if we really get into a SAQA, just from a clarity perspective, SAQA merchants will confirm that they meet the following eligibility criteria for this payment channel. So the company accepts only card not present transactions. All processing of cardholder data is entirely outsourced to PCI DSS validated third-party service provider. Company does not electronically store, process, or transmit cardholder data. Company has confirmed that all third parties handling storage, processing, or transmission of cardholder data are PCI compliant, and any cardholder data your company retains is on paper. No opportunity for anybody to perform query and extract. So query, when I say it's an automated query, so there is no opportunity for any organization to do an automated query and extract the bulk of the card data, because that's where the higher risk is. So on the SAQ, from a SAQ AEP, it's predominantly the same. It's just that the all processing of the cardholder data, except for the payment page, is entirely outsourced to PCI validated third-party payment processor. And your website does not receive cardholder data, but controls how consumers or their cardholder data are redirected to PCI DSS third-party payment processor. Okay, so this is something that we have seen from the perspective of the example that we have looked at, right?
Yeah, got it. Like all the websites mainly uses this second thing only, right? In cat AEP only, right?
Merely, but let's take a look at Amazon as well.
Yeah, Amazon will have the card saved.
Yes, they have their own page. So let's say whatever. So let's say I buy this for an example. So let me approve this. My mobile. Right, I have done the approval. So once I buy this particular product from Amazon.in, I have a opportunity to make a payment here itself. So it's a Amazon.in page itself, which is asking me for the card numbers or the card details. Once I enter the CVV and click on continue, it will authorize the transaction and the payment will happen. So which means that Amazon.in has an ability to store, process, and obviously I am transmitting my card data to Amazon. So they have that opportunity to impact the cardholder data from a security standpoint. They'll come under the SAQ-B. They will come under the SAQ-B because they are the merchant who is hosting the payment page on them, and they are capturing the payment details or the payment or the cardholder data as well. Clear?
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Then we have SAQB that we have looked at as well from an imprint perspective. So the company uses only an image machine or uses only standalone dial-out terminal, take your customer payment card information. So the dial-out terminals are like, if you remember the old modern days, so those are the dial-out terminals. They are not connected to the internet until or unless you dial a number and then they connect to the internet as well. So that's what they do. Now, in these dial-out terminals, the specific ones which are related to the card, they don't connect to the internet at all. They direct. So once you dial out a number, they connect to your organization, and that's where you store the data. But that's also on the print. That's a fax kind of a machine that you have. So it doesn't go to the internet, but it's more like a fax machine where you put in a page and the information gets transmitted onto the other side and a print comes out there. So that's a dial-out terminal.
Okay.
Then from a SAQ CBT perspective, the company only payment processing in a virtual payment terminal accessed by an internet connected web browser. So there is no standalone application. There is no application where you double click, it opens up, and then you enter the card number. You have to browse the terminal over the web browser by putting in https:// and then the address of that virtual terminal. And once you do that, you have to authenticate yourself to that virtual terminal as well. Only after that you will be allowed to enter the card number or to do the transaction as well. So we will look at these examples as well. That I told you, we will look at that example as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we have SAQC, wherein the company has a payment application system and an internet connection on the same device or the local area network. The payment application internet device is not connected to any other system within the environment. So it is pretty much within the environment and very, very consolidated. Physical location of the POS environment is also not connected to other premises of location and any LAN for a single source only. If you look at a SAQC, these are for the manually enter a single transaction, right? And I talk about a POS terminal. So that is where if you go to proper stop, you swipe a card, that's the terminal that we are talking about. So that's a one transaction at a time, and it is connected only on that particular machine. So from a network, I will not be able to connect to that particular system at all. So that's the AQC will be used. Okay.
Yes.
And we have SAQD, which is a common set of questions for all the merchants and all the service providers. So all the other merchants who can store, process, or transmit the cardholder data, they will be categorized under the SAQ. So BPOs will come under the SAQD because they have access to the application where they can query the card information for an individual. They can listen to the conversation. They have access to the electronic card data as well. They have access to the printed card data as well. So largely the BPOs will come under as a service provider under a SAQD. And Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, these organizations who store, process, or transmit card website, they will also come under a SAQ. Paytm, for example, because it stores the card information, it can store the card information as well. They will also come under a SAQ B from a merchant standpoint. So Paytm Mall, for example, will come under the SAQ-D. Now, from a decision tree perspective, so there are a lot of SAQs. So if we have to simplify the decision on the SAQ, that is where we have this decision. The service provider, yes, directly go to SAQ, no other SAQ to be looked at. So all the service providers have to fill SAQ-D. Storage of electronic data, if is done by a merchant or a merchant store, if that is the case, then they will have to fill in the SAQ-D. So any storage of electronic cardholder data, they will go and fill the SAQ-D until they are a level 1 merchant. So they, at that time, they will have to get the QSA audit done. Then card present transactions. So here it's a storage. Here we are not talking about the storage. Here, whether the merchant accepts the card present transaction, wherein the swipe of a card is present, which is not protected by a PCI listed P2PE solution, point-to-point encryption solution. If that is the case, if it is happening via imprint, SAQ-B will be filled in. If it is happening on a payment app or a POS, SAQ-C will be filled in. If it is happening via a web browser, kind of a virtual POS, then it will be a SAQ-CVT. So that's the SAQs from a card present transaction standpoint. Now, if it is a MOTO transaction, MOTO is mail or telephone order. So if it is a MOTO transaction, then a CSG function fully outsourced to PCI compliant service provider, no electronic storage happening on the merchant end, SAQ-A. Again, if it is SAQ-B, if it is a POS, SAQ-C, and if it is a web browser, then SAQ-CVT. Okay. Now, from a MOTO perspective, MO perspective, with mail order, imprint is applicable. From a POS perspective, TO is applicable, telephone order. Here as well, it's a telephone order which is applicable, not the mail order. Then we have e-commerce transaction, wherein the merchant accepts transaction. Yes, if it is everything is outsourced, CSG function fully out to PCI compliant service provider. Some elements are there. So here SAQ-A, here SAQ-A-VT, and then this is managed by the merchant SAQ-D. Clear?
Yes.
Now we will quickly look at a PADSS applicability. Now, PADSS, if you remember, is only applicable for which are involved in the payment settlement or the authorization. Correct? Now, from that perspective, there is another parameter too, wherein these payment applications have to be a commercial software and they are available in the market to be sold off the shelf. Off the shelf means no customization. So I go onto the page, I take that as a product and I implement that as is. So there is no customization that is needed. At that point in time, I can go for my application to be a PADSS compliant software or an application. So type of payment application, off the shelf, standard payment application without customization, yes. Software developed in module, yes, apply to the module which are related to the payment functions. So capturing of a card number or settlement or the authorization. So those modules will need to be tested from a PADSS compliance standpoint. For hardware terminals, yes, if terminal meet a specific criteria like this. So if there is a terminal or a payment terminal which is taking or so for example, it's a HDFC POS terminal or HDFC PED terminal, wherein at the end of the day, a merchant puts in a settlement or presses a settlement button, and the long stuff comes out. So at that point in time, if that is the case, then these applications will also be considered to be a PADSS qualified application. So a merchant or a service provider can go for a PADSS certification for these applications. Okay. Then software developed by application service provider only as a service. Now, for example, if there is a SaaS application, that SaaS application will not have a PADS applicability. Why? Because it is not being sold off the shelf. It is hosted, maintained, administered, operated by the service provider. So the PADSS will not be applicable on that SaaS application. Non-payment application, that is part of a payment application suite. No, it is only for the payment application. So non-payment application doesn't have an applicability of PADSS. Software for only one large customer, develop customer specification. Again, it is no, because it is not off the shelf. It is a custom written code for a particular customer based on their requirement. So again, a PADSS will not be applicable here. Software developed by merchant or service provider and used only in-house. Again, no, because of the same rule. And then supporting systems, for example, operating system, database, back office system, firewall, router, etc. Again, these are not the payment applications, so PADSS will not be applicable to them. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. So I will keep this slide for you to consume, and you can download this and you can read it through to gain more clarity on the PADSS from an applicability standpoint and what kind of environment needs to be there from a PADSS perspective.
Sure, Paras.
Then we jump into a roles and responsibilities. And Nikita, please let me know if you think that I'm going too fast or too slow, so I can moderate my speed as well.
Yeah, this is comfortable, no problem.
Okay, perfect. So from a role and responsibility perspective, payment card brands, they develop, enforce the compliance program. They put fines and penalties for non-compliance on the merchants and at the same time on the acquirer and issuer, which is nothing but the banks. Now, what happens? Typically, the risk is with the bank. Larger risk is with the bank because that's where the real money is from a data perspective or from a account perspective. Now, since it is a risk to the bank, sometimes what happens when there is a slight, I would say a slight non-compliance on the PCI DSS for a bank, usually a QSA says that I need to have a exception approved by the payment brand. At that time, the bank gets into a dialogue and both of them share their perspective about that particular compliant need or a compliance need. And if payment brand accepts that as an exception, then the QSA can give that exception as well to the bank under the audit. Now, because it's a risk with the bank, usually the payment brand leaves the decision to the bank itself. So they say it's your risk, it's your. I have flagged this as a red flag to you. So if you are okay to accept this as a risk, I am also okay to accept this as a risk. But this needs to be documented and agreed between the payment brand and the bank as well. Okay. From an endorsement perspective, the payment brand endorse the QSA, PAQSA, and ASP company qualification criteria, which means that they are working with the council to make sure that whatever the criteria council is defining from a QS or from a ASP company qualification perspective, those are discussed and agreed with the payment brands itself. So there's a committee of payment brand where all the 5 members participate along with the Security Standards Council. They work on the draft, they look at the compliance needs, they look at the qualification criteria as well, and then they sign off those criteria. And that's where PCI Security Standards Council come and release those qualification criteria. So they have, those qualifications has a blessing of the payment. They also provide feedback to council on the performance of these organizations. So what happened? If you remember in our last discussion or the last class that we had, I gave you an example of my experience with Electracard. Now they were certified by ex-company who was a PCI QSA. Unfortunately, the auditor just entered a room and looked at the servers itself directly and rather was relying on the papers or the policies which were being shared to the auditors. When we audited, we observed some 1,600 critical observations. And when this report goes to the payment brand, they compared the report with the last year audit report, and they identified that there was a huge difference in terms of the findings or the detailings as well that's been done in the report. So what payment brand instructed a council is to list that company X as a red flag.
So you mean to say like
listed that.
yeah, so you mean to say like red flag, the one who did audit before or red flagged, or how it is?
Yeah, so for example, the company X did not perform all the valid checks during the audit. So they got listed into a remediation sale onto the PCI Security Standards Council website, wherein they will have to resubmit their processes of it. They will have to resubmit certain new reports of the audits that they will do to the Security Standards Council, so that council can then take a decision whether they are doing a right audit or a bad audit.
Okay.
So if they are convinced as a council that they are doing correct audit, they will put them back into a green status. But till the time they are not convinced on the audit practice of that organization, they will keep them into a red flag category.
Okay, so they can't do audits for other clients of them also.
They can still perform the other audits as well. But so let's say if I'm a client and if I'm looking at an auditor, I will prefer my auditor to be the best. So I will avoid engaging any company which is listed in a red color on the PCI council, right?
True, understood.
Right, so it directly impacts the security, or not the security, but the performance of the organization and eventually the business as well.
Yeah, got it, Paras. Yes.
Oh. Then we have, so every breach that happens, then any of the payment brand, depending upon where it happened and what relationship that payment brand had with that organization which got breached or impacted, they can instruct a forensic investigation for that. So I'll give you an example. There was a breach that happened at one of the bank in Bangalore. What happened? A group of people went to an ATM and they transacted 90 crore rupee in Indian currency. They transacted 90 crore rupee in Bangalore. So those transactions started to come to a bank, and it was not a very big bank. So it was a low profile bank. So, and this was a Visa client. The network was of Visa. So when the high amount of transactions are observed on Visa for that particular bank, Visa immediately flagged that off to the bank, saying that there is a high volume of transaction which is happening on network, and this is not a regular stuff. So this is something which is out of rhythm, which is happening. So please look into it. So banks got into an action. They did initial checks and they could not identify anything. And then they went back to Visa and said everything is fine. We had checked. Visa said okay. Then another batch of transactions came, and at this time Visa blocked the transaction because this was not a regular behavior. So Visa blocked all the transactions coming from a particular ATM uh, for that particular bank. And again, Visa went back to the bank and said, hey, we have blocked these transactions for you. Please get this rectified. I am not releasing the transactions for this particular ATM at this moment. At that time, the bank engaged a forensic agency, and the forensics investigation, when it happened, it was bring to light that there was a malware which was there on the server, and that malware was auto approving all the transaction without verifying the account balance. So, for example, if I have account balance of 100 rupee, I go to an ATM, I enter 10,000 rupee, the transaction will hit the bank. Now, before the transaction can get verified that whether Paras has that 100 rupee balance or a 10,000 rupee balance, it gets approved automatically. So the ATM will dispense 10,000 rupee to without deducting anything from my account. So my balance remains 100 rupee, but I get 10,000 rupee. Then I again do a transaction of 25,000, auto approved, I get 25,000. Again 25,000, 25,000, 25,000, and so on. So, so this is something which was unusual, which Visa identified, and they instructed the bank to go for a forensic investigation. And when this investigation happened, they figured out that this was a root cause. Once that root cause was identified, at that time, Visa and bank, they took a decision whether to approve those earlier transactions or not, or whether to reject all those transactions. Okay, so this can happen the payment card brand as well, because they have the visibility into the transactions which are coming from for a particular bank.
Yeah, got it, Paras.
Then from a merchant and service provider perspective, the merchant and provider both review and understand the PCI security standard, which gets released on a time-to-time basis. So they review and understand the standard. They understand the validation and the reporting requirements being laid out by the PCI Security Council. They validate and report the compliance to their acquirers or to the payment card brand as required. And they maintain ongoing compliance, not just during the assessment, but after the assessment as well. So when I was in Verizon and after that as well, so every year Verizon releases a PCI investigation report. So they call it as a PCIR. Okay. Now this PCIR report is so this is a report which brings in a set of organizations which were PCI compliant, yet they faced a breach. Okay, so for example, I am a company X and I am already PCI certified, but I got breached. My investigation is done by Verizon or the partner of Verizon, and they reassessed my PCI environment because of the breach. So they reassessed my environment. So this report talks about the result of before PCI and after PCI. before breach of the PCI and after breach, what was the situation of the PCI standard. And it was, so every year this report gets published. And if you look at this report, you will see that more than 80% of the organization, they fail to sustain the compliance throughout the year. So they will fulfill all the requirements which is laid down by the standard before their first audit. They get the audit report clean, they get the certification done. All that is good, but then throughout the year, they will not maintain those controls with the same rigor. After the breach, when Verizon did an assessment and they reassessed on the company on the PCI controls, they would note that all the requirements are below 20% or 30% of the compliance. Right. So that's the situation wherein the organizations get into a trouble and they get penalized, they get fined by the regulators, by the payment brands as well. So that situation can happen. So that's where for merchant and service provider, it is important that they maintain ongoing compliance, not just during the assessment, but throughout the year as well. They are also required to read and incorporate communication from the payment brand, acquirer, and PCI security standards throughout the year. So any communication which is being sent across to them, they are required and they are needed to understand and read through that as well. From a QSA standpoint, the first point is very important, which is to validate the scope of the assessment. What happens in ISO 27001, for example, the organization who is undergoing the audit, they tell auditor what is going to be the scope of ISO 27001. So they can say in a phase one of the audit, I am taking only the HR function operating out of Noida to be my scope for ISO 27001. Next 3 years, I have to have HR and IT as scope operating from Noida and Gurgaon location. So that's the flexibility that ISO 27001 provides to the organization. In PCI DSS, it is the auditor who decides the scope of the audit. How they decide the scope of the audit? Based on the business. So what are the business operations? How the business operations are running, wherein the cardholder data is involved. That is where the first boundary of the PCI scope comes. The second boundary of PCI comes in determining what kind of IT systems are being used to store, process, or transmit the cardholder data. So that's the second boundary. The third boundary is what vendors or service providers I have with whom these data points are being shared or they are having an access to it. So these are the 3 points or the areas where the auditor will look for, and they will define the scope of the assessment. So the authority to validate, sign off the scope is in the hands of the auditor in case of a PCI DSS. And that's a very, very important point to remember, because that is something which many organizations doesn't know. And when we go for an audit, we have to tell them very clearly that being an auditor, I will be understanding all the business processes that you do, and I will be defining or confirming you the scope that this is going to be your scope, and I will be doing an audit on that scope itself. The second responsibility is to conduct PCI DSS assessment, which is pretty self-explanatory. So they will have to do the audit, use independent judgment to confirm PCI requirements have been met by the organization. be on site for duration of any relevant assessment procedure. What does it mean is you have to validate certain controls on the site. So you cannot rely on the screenshots. You may not rely on the policies entirely to do an audit. So you have to read the policy, understand the procedures, and then do the audit on the site, whether those are in compliance to the PCI DSS standard requirements or not. Review the work product that supports the assessment procedure. Ensure adherence to the requirements and security assessment procedures. Select business facilities and system component where sampling is employed. Now, it may happen that, let's say you are doing an audit for a bank, and in bank, you have multiple processes. You have issuance as one of the process, you have settlement as one of the business process, you have reconciliation as one of the process, you have dispute resolution as one of the process, you have statement generation as one of the process, and so on. So different processes which may have access to the cardholder data. Now, I have identified the scope that these are the business processes which will be in the scope of a PCI. These are the servers which will participate in the PCI compliance, and these are the desktops or the workstations which will also be part of the compliance. Now, if there are multiple branches of the bank itself is pretty big, the number of IT systems can run into thousands and lakhs as well. It may happen that you have 10,000 servers. Now, as an auditor, you will not be able to audit all the 10,000 servers. That will be very, very difficult and impossible to cover from a scope perspective. At that point, you will use a sampling methodology, and you are free to define that sampling methodology in auditor. Typically, a sampling methodology says anything which is of a same type. So if I have Windows 2016 server as common platform, I will choose a 30% of the total Windows 2016 to be a part of my audit. So I can base the sampling methodology either based on the operating system or by the role of that particular device itself. So if there are 10 firewalls or 20 firewalls, I can say all the make and model of the device for these firewalls are same. So I will only sample 10 firewalls out of 20. Where the number is less, I can increase the sampling methodology. Where the number is huge, I can reduce the number of samples. Okay, so that flexibility is with the auditor, and that is something which we will look at when we will look at the report as well, how to use that sampling methodology. But this is something which auditor takes the call upon. Evaluate the compensating controls as well. Now, these compensating controls are approved by the QSA. So they evaluate. So if there is so let's say the organization doesn't have a technology to implement a particular technology control from a PCI standard, they will ask for a compensating control. The auditor will say, I will give you a compensating control, but then you will have to first tell me what are those compensating controls are. So the organization will say, I have put in this additional control, which is not a requirement of a PCI standard, yet I am doing it. I have done this, I have implemented this as a secondary control, again, which is not a part of a PCI standard, yet I am doing it, and so on. So the company will say, I have done A, B, C, and D, which is not mentioned in the PCI standard as a requirement, but I am still doing it to reduce the risk. However, I am not meeting this control in entirely, but from an intent standpoint, I am meeting. That is where the QSA can evaluate those A, B, C, and D controls, and the QSA can approve those to make the overall environment as a compliant with an asterisk. So compliant with compensating control. Clear? And all of this, we will absolutely, we will look into the reports, a sample report as well, and how these compensating controls look like and how they work. We will have a look at that as well.
Sure, Paras. So here, this QSA will do some kind of assessments to give the quality
Yes.
report, right? So that assessment part also we are learning?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, Paras, you
Okay.
can
So
continue.
what we are learning is, so we are learning the standard plus
Okay.
how to do the audit as well.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay. So how to do the audit part is common across PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, ISO, all that, stuff. So
Okay.
that how to do audit is a common area. What we are looking right now is a PCI area, but we will look at both the areas in PCI itself so that it
Okay.
becomes a foundation for you to do the HIPAA and the GDPR assessments as well.
Okay. Got it.
Then from a ISS standpoint, they also have a similar role to play like a QSA. So they also are the ones who decide on the scope. They also carry out a PCI assessment. They also use an independent judgment. They provide the guidance, support and guidance during the compliance process. So they are the advisors to the internal stakeholders. That's a difference between ISA and QSA. They also are available on the site for the duration of assessment procedures. They also review the work product. They also ensure adherence. They select the business facility and system components when sampling is employed, evaluate the compensating control, and produce a final report. So everything is same. Only this point, which is provide support and guidance during the compliance process, is something where the ISA acts as an advisor to the internal business team. Okay, QSA becomes an auditor and ISA becomes an advisor.
Okay.
Then from an ASV standard or ASV perspective, they are required to perform an external vulnerability scan in accordance with the PCI DSS requirement 11.2. They ensure that scans do not impact the normal operation of the customer environment. So nothing should be hampered because the scan happens on the production live environment. It doesn't have on a test environment. It is a live environment. They ensure that scans do not penetrate or intentionally alter the customer environment, scanning all the IP ranges and domains provided by the scan customer to identify active IP addresses and services. Consulting with the customer to determine if IP address found but not provided by the scan customer should be included, and they provide a determination as to whether the scan customer components have passed the scanning requirements or not. So I have a video which is available on YouTube itself, and I just want you to look at this from how the ASV looks like. So you're still able to see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a Tenable.io. That's a SaaS application which is provided by the Tenable to do the ASV scan. Now there are different scan templates which are available, wherein you can use those to carry out different kind of compliance scans or a risk-based scan. You have a PCI scan here as well as one of the option, and you have policies, etc. Now, from a PCI standpoint, you have to do a quarterly PCI scan. So you have this option PCI WAS scan. So WAS is web application. So they are right now focusing on the web application, but you can do this for the network as well. So
Okay.
PCI WAS scan. So you click in here, so this is on-demand schedule that you have. And these are certain vulnerabilities which will be reported after the scan. Now, if you look at here, critical, high, medium, low. So these are the different vulnerabilities that we have got. So 26 medium vulnerabilities, 3 low vulnerabilities, 10 high and 0 critical. Now to pass a ASV scan, it is important that high and critical rated vulnerabilities are remediated and we get a clean scan report from the ASV. When I say a clean scan report from an ASV, essentially means that I need to have a, a report wherein it says there is no critical, no high reported vulnerability on the tested infrastructure or the application. And there is a certificate which gets issued by the ASV provider once they are comfortable with it. Now here, if we look at, we have 10 high vulnerability. So as a company, what I can do, I can click on that particular vulnerability and I can provide my justification. I can say that this is a wrongly reported issue. I don't have this vulnerability anymore. I can say I have remediated this vulnerability. Can you retest it? I can say that this particular IP does not belong to me, why you have scanned it. So there can be multiple justifications or the comments that a company can give back to the ASV. The ASV on receiving those comments can either rescan the environment or can further ask questions to the company. So they will also negotiate. If the ASV is comfortable, they will issue a certificate. Otherwise, they will issue a certificate with a fail rating. Okay, so if you look at here, so they have, I think the quality of this is not that great. So for example, these were the list of vulnerabilities that they have. So they have chosen the first to really look at that. They go in there, they can put explanation here, they can attach the evidences, and they can submit it to the ASV. So once they are done, they get a report. I'll quickly show you a report as well. Here it is. If it is, no, I don't. I can show you a sanitized version of the report later, but there is a report that I can show you from an ASV standpoint how the certificate looks like. Okay, but I will have to sanitize that report first and then I can show it to you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, but typically the ASV is nothing but a website where you go, you put in your IP addresses, you put in your website addresses, and then you press the scan button. The service runs automatically. It gives you the long list of vulnerability, and then you either accept or remediate or discuss that with service provider to say whether this vulnerability you accept or not. If everything gets closed, you run a rescan, you get a clean report, you download that report and a certificate from ASV and you show it to the auditor when the audit. Then comes a most important part, which is a determination of the scope. So we talked about the scope from a process standpoint, we talked about maintaining the inventory as well. So the most important parameter from determination of a scope perspective is a cardholder data flow. Now this cardholder data flow, so what all systems are being when the transaction is happening. So for example, from an external entity, a transaction initiate comes to an application. From an application, it goes to a router, a firewall, again a new router, and touches the internal system. The internal system then puts it into a database, and this database is accessible by workstation because they can access ports, they can query database, And this system is also accessible by workstation because it hosts an internal application. So this becomes a root for my cardholder data environment. Just to show you a glimpse of cardholder data environment, this is how it gets recorded in the report. And this is how the organizations are also expected to maintain the cardholder data flow. So here, for example, what we are seeing, there's a FDI China. So these blue colored lines are from FDI China to the client and from client to from client to a separate client and from a client to FDI China. So these are the three different lines that we have drawn here. From a scope perspective, we have drawn a boundary of out of scope and in the scope edge. Okay. So these blue lines are, or the hidden text under blue is the BPO company. This red is a bank. Okay, so this bank has outsourced a process to a BPO company, and that's what the data flow looks like. So this BPO gets a cardholder data from FDI China. This BPO gets a cardholder data FTP or SFTP, and this BPO shares that information to the banking client. So that's where we see this gray line, right? So this gray line is a data shared with the bank. This blue line is the data which is coming to the BPO from these two entities. Okay. Now, during the transmit or during the transmit, what are the different components that we see are in the root? So we see one router is in the root. We see one core switch is in the, then we see one access layer switch in the root. We see certain servers which are storage to the card data. We are seeing certain more network devices, voice infrastructure in the root as well. We see certain agents as well in the root because they have access to the card data. These agents work on a system, so these systems are also in the scope. From this line perspective, from this line Abertha root perspective, we have a Cisco ASA firewall as well in the root. This will also become a part of the scope. Now, once the data is being sent to the bank, there is another router which is in the scope. So if this router gets breached or compromised, the security of card data is at risk. If this firewall is compromised, the security of card data is at risk. If this router gets compromised, the security of card holder data is at risk. If this switch is compromised, a larger breach can happen because data from FDI China, data from Abertha SFTP, and data to this bank is passing. So if this switch gets compromised or breached, then my larger data of card can be at risk as well. So I will put my focus from a network standpoint. I will put my focus here, and absolute focus here, so that I don't miss any security parameter on this particular network component. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. So this exactly is what I was trying to show here, that from a cardholder data flow perspective, you have to document all the path that a transaction can take place. And that's something which gets documented as well. From an inventory standpoint, API prescribed this template, but we are free to alter this template as well or add new columns to the template. But information needs to be captured. What information they are looking? What cardholder data is getting stored. So whether it's a CBV2 number, whether it's a 16-digit card number, whether it's a cardholder name, expiration date, what kind of, or a track 2 data. So what kind of data is getting stored in this system? What is the reason to store that data? Till how long that data will be stored? So a retention period. and what are the different protection mechanisms the organization is following for the protection of this cardholder data on this system. So that's the minimum requirement from an inventory perspective that PCI says an organization should maintain. So this we have already seen. What I will show you now is a business process for one of the clients for which we have done the audit. So this is a business process. I will try to maximize the screen here. And this is an extract from an audit report. Okay, so this is a real process that happens. So there is a BPO. I have masked or I have changed the BPO name here. So there's the BPO, company with 56 contact and delivery center across US, Canada, India, Netherlands, France, Germany, Italy, Jamaica, etc., etc., etc. BPO focuses on providing call center and back office service to customer in US, Europe, Australia, and India. BPO is a level 1 service provider. Okay. What is the requirement for a level 1 service provider? A QSA audit. Right?
Yes.
So a service provider requirement is So a service provider level 1, everybody says annual on-site assessment performed by the auditor. So hence it is important to mention that a company is level 1 merchant or a service provider or what it is, why this audit was undertaken. So BPO is a level 1 service provider. The scope of this assessment is limited to the BPO call center located in the Quezon City and Iloilo City, Philippines. Cardholder data is stored, processed, and transmitted for the following in-scope client process by the BPO. First process is Anderson. Anderson is a manufacturer of wooden windows and doors in the US. BPO provides remote product support to USA-based Anderson customers through inbound calls to their hotline number in Manila from their Libis site, which means I am a manufacturer of a furniture and I have sold a furniture to a customer. If a customer has a problem, they will pick up a phone and call up a support center. That support center is of this BPO.
Yeah,
okay.
got it. Mm-hmm.
Agent receives inbound calls. So there's no outbound call, it's an inbound call, largely from consumer and builder contractors, and handle inbound calls for product inquiry, rate, installation, complaint, and return. So these are certain areas where this BPO gets engaged. So if a customer has a return to file, they will take the call. If they have certain complaint, this BPO will take a call. Anything related to a product inquiry, rate, installation, this BPO will attend the call on behalf of Anderson. BPO agents are provided remote desktop access to the Anderson system. Now, if I have to support a customer on a set of products, or if I have to tell about a rate or an installation, or if I have to log a complaint, or if I have to file a return, I need access to the database for the sold products. So for that to happen, Anderson has given a BPO an access to their server. They have an application and the agent or a BPO agent can work on that application in the Anderson environment. Okay? Clear?
Yes.
Now from the perspective of this, the data is hosted, managed, and administered by Anderson itself. Okay. So
Yeah.
the responsibility for the data is with the Anderson. So any product that they sell, they maintain the security of that data. To provide product support by using the Windows Care application. So we have captured the application name as well. When a customer wants to purchase a new product, part or renew their maintenance agreement, the BPO agent asks for a credit card information. Now, here, why we have taken that into the scope is a portion coming that a customer wants to purchase a product. Let's say a customer wants to purchase a nail, or a customer wants to purchase a furniture itself. Then the BPO agent will ask for the credit card information over the inbound call. What information they need? A card holder name, a 16 or a 15-digit card number, and the expiration date only. They don't take the CVV2 over the phone and enter it directly into the application which is provided by the Anderson to this BPO.
Okay.
Once the transaction is submitted, the PAN number is masked in the application. So masking is, for example, if I have to mask this, it's like this,
Okay.
right? So I don't know what the real data is. It just gets replaced by some digits. So it can
Yeah.
be
Like
X, it can be
Amazon saves our cards.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? So the PAN number is masked in the application. PAN data is stored encrypted in the voice logs of NICE. NICE is a software which is used for the voice calls. So PAN, which is a 16-digit or a 15-digit card number, is stored encrypted in the voice logs. Why voice logs? Because the card number is being spoken over the phone.
Yes.
So the call recording happens, and that call recording gets encrypted using the AES 256-bit encryption. Okay. BPO has also implemented record on demand feature to avoid storage of CVV2 within the voice logs, which means that if I speak a CVV2 on the call, agent has a flexibility to pause the recording for a certain period.
Okay.
So as a BPO agent, I will click a button, recording will not happen. I will click the button again and the recording will resume back.
Okay.
Okay, so that is a record on demand. BPO agent do not have access to save the listened card holder information on their workstation. So they had a very limited hard disk space, and since they are connecting remotely to the Anderson system, they were not allowed to save anything on their own desktop. So if I am hearing a card number as a BPO agent, if I am hearing a card number, I do not have an ability to save that card number on my workstation.
Okay.
Because of the technical controls which has been enforced. So that's the Anderson process. So clear?
But still, cards can be misused, right? If the BPO agent note down the CVV number somewhere, he has all the
Yes.
details with him, no?
Yes. So typically what happens when there is a BPO process, any agent entering into a production floor, they are checked by a security guard to see whether they are taking a pen and a paper inside or not.
Okay.
So no pen, no paper, no pencil, no notebook is allowed inside the floor.
Okay.
There are
Got it.
printers available. There are printers available, but the agent will not have access to that printer as well because the printer will be into one room and that room will be logged.
Yeah, okay. Got it, got it. So he can't
Right.
remember the data. Even he's
Yes. So
remembering
they
the CVV, he can't remember 16-digit card number.
correct. And even if he is remembering a 16-digit card number, it will be only one or two card numbers that he will be able to remember.
Yeah.
Right. So risk
Yes.
is very low there.
Yeah, yeah. Correct. Got it.
Right. Then there is another business process at this BPO, which is a quadrant process or a QSS, what they say. Now, this is a mail order process. So Quadrant is a premier magazine publishing company for which BPO provides subscription support services to them from an APAC region through inbound call. So it's a TO, telephone order, email, fax, and white mail, which is a hard copy subscription form, which is a mail order. Okay. BPO agent provides support to the customer for new subscription, renewal for already subscribed magazines, termination of existing subscription, and on other magazine subscription related queries. So the support that this BPO provides to Quadrant. BPO agent are provided again a remote desktop access to the systems hosted, managed, administered by the Quadrant itself to provide subscription support by the Smart Agent application. Here we had window care application given by N to this BPO. Here it is a Smart Agent application given by Quadrant to this BPO. BPO can receive the card information through inbound customer call, fax, and a mail. So these are the three channels through which a Quadrant can or this BPO can receive the card information. The first is a white mail, which is a hard copy subscription form. A customer can post a printed copy of a subscription form with the card details to PO Box at Singapore, the Economist magazine only, or at Manila, Philippines site for other magazine subscriptions. If a subscription form is posted to Singapore PO Box, shipping vendor, which is contracted by Quadrant as well. It is not BPO vendor. So a shipping vendor selected by Quadrant ships the form to a BPO Manila office. So I am a citizen in Singapore. I want to take a subscription of Economist magazine. I take a form, fill in my name, etc. Put in my card details as well on that form and post that form to the given address. That given address is of Singapore itself. So there is a vendor who receives that form and forward that form to a BPO office in Manila for a Singapore citizen. For anywhere else, the postal address is directly of Philippines itself. Okay, so this BPO receives the hard copy subscription form, which they call as a white mail. Then there is a banking team, which is working at a Manila site, and they receive the courier, enter the card information in the credit card database application, which again is provided by the Quadrant to this BPO to generate a unique masking number for the written PAN on the form. The credit card database application is accessible to the banking team only through RDP access to Quadrant system. A sticker is printed with the newly generated unique masking number and is pasted on the written PAN on the hard copy subscription form. So what they do, there's a team which sits in a segregated area. So it's a closed door room. There is one printer which is kept. The person, so there are 2 to 3 people who are sitting in that room. They receive the courier, which is for this white mail subscription. They receive the courier, they open it up, they read the 16-digit card number, which is written on the form. They open an application which is provided by Quadrant to them. So they open that application, put in these 16-digit card number, expiration date, and the subscriber name in that application. That application gives them a unique code after entry. They take a printout on a sticker of that code, unique code. They take a printout of that unique code on a sticker and put that sticker with the unique code on the 16-digit card number on the physical form. So that card number is now not visible to anybody else other than these 3 individuals. So tomorrow, if a breach has to happen, these are the 3 individuals who will be under the investigation. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. So they take a printout on the sticker and put that sticker on the 16-digit card number. So that's what they do. After masking the PAN, banking team agent enter the customer form detail in another application, which is again provided by Quadrant, and print the order report. So they generate a order for that customer. This order report, along with the masked printed form, is then scanned by the banking team agent. The scan of the masked form, along with the customer report or order report, is stored under this particular directory on the scanning system. On daily basis at 9 o'clock Manila time, a scheduled script, which is again provided by BPO, by Quadrant itself, is executed and the day scanned files are uploaded to the online document storage system at this particular URL and are archived and stored in the archive folder on the scanning system, the banking team agent. Next day, older files are deleted by this schedule script also. Okay, so what happened? Once they have printed a sticker on the form, they put in the rest of the details in another application, AMP application. The AMPS application gives a order report. They scan both order report and this asked or a hidden card form. They scan both these forms together and put that into a folder on their system. Every day in the night, 9 o'clock, a script automatically runs, which picks up these forms, transfer these forms to the Quadrant, and next day morning delete this file automatically from the BPO environment. Okay, so as a BPO, I received the form, I entered the card data indication, I got the code, I printed that code on a sticker, put that sticker on the form, scan that form, put that form into a C drive, some folder. Every day a script will run automatically and the detail will be uploaded to Quadrant and my data will be deleted in the next day morning. Clear?
Okay. Yeah.
Now, since they have the physical form still with them, they have scanned it, they have transferred the scans to the Quadrant, but the physical forms are still with them. So the mass printed forms and the customer report are then stored in a safe vault with the key inside the banking team room itself. There are only 3 custodians to the safe vault key, which include operation head, a quality process head, and the process head itself. So there are who are having an access to that particular key. So BPO on periodic basis physically shred the printed forms on an email request from the Quadrant. BPO maintain a record disposal register for the printed form shredding. This is clear?
Yes, Paras, it's clear.
Okay. Then, okay, so this is the process from this is a white mail process for Quadrant process. So there's a customer submits a form to Singapore office or a Singapore address. The guy picks up the post, sends it to this BPO, or the customer can directly send it to BPO. So BPO receives the physical form. There's a banking team at the BPO. They take the printed form, enter that form card number into an application, and credit card database system generates a unique record number for each application. So the number generates, banking team generates a unique number sticker to print masked printed written PAN on the receipt form. The sticker is then printed on the PAN. Banking team scans the form. Order is placed in the Smart Agent application. Saved scans are automatically purged by the script and also kept at this location for the scanning system. The physical documents with MassPan are stored in the safe vault with the banking team room, and these documents are studied based on the periodic instruction from the customer itself. So that's a process from a white mail perspective. Okay. Now, we said that there are three types. One is a white mail, one is a fax, and the inbound as well. So this is something that we have looked at, a white mail process. There is a fax process. So banking team, again the same team, receives the fax, enter the cardholder information into the same application, generate the unique masking number again. The number is printed on the sticker. The sticker is printed with the generated unique masking number, pasted on the PAN on the fax subscription form. So eventually, the fax is as good as a physical form itself. So rather than receiving it through courier, they are getting it through a fax. But the form is similar and the process is similar as well. So it's the same process again. No change. And then this is the voicemail process. This is another customer, which is Sony. So Sony is we all know it's an electronic company for which this BPO provided technical customer service for the home theater and digital imaging product. Agents at the BPO site receive inbound customer call by providing technical support to assist customers in resolving their issues. Network connectivity between the BPO and the Sony client is through a point-to-point dedicated link. In the event customer wishes to purchase item available at Sony website, agent receive inbound voice call referred to as telesales and purchase the selected item on behalf of the customer at the Sony store, which is a Sony website. Agent then requires the customer PAN, expiry date, name, and CVV2 number to make the purchase over the phone. This information is directly entered onto the Sony store website and processed by Sony itself. If the customer wishes to purchase specific part, the agent receives inbound voice call, blah, 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 blah. So here, what is happening is Sony has a website. I am a customer and I don't know how to visit a website and make a purchase. So I call up a Sony now as a BPO. So this BPO guy receives a call. I provide my card details to the BPO agent, and BPO agent on my behalf make a purchase on the Sony's website. Right? So it's like Yatra. So I can go on to yatra.com and book my flight tickets myself. Or alternatively, I can call up Yatra. They can suggest me flights and I can tell them my card details and they will book the flights on my behalf. Shared with them. Right? So that's a similar process that they had for Sony as well.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Then they have Etna. That's I would say made up name. It's not the real name. So it's a healthcare company in US. BPO provides support services to Aetna customers for their health insurance plan. BPO also helps the healthcare professionals in corroborating if the patient is covered by a specific medical plan or not. The BPO provides support to make insurance premium payments on behalf of the customer. So Aetna provides the complete hosted and managed. The BPO connect through a Citrix with a two-factor authentication, etc. Again, here what they are taking, customer can provide the cardholder information like PAN, cardholder name, CVV2, and the card expiry date as well through fax and through phone. Okay, so either through a fax or through a phone, the cardholder information can come into the environment. Customer fax copy of payment request form to Aetna. Aetna manages and administers a fax server to which BPO does not have any access. A restricted fax is then forwarded to this. In this case, the fax is received by the company itself. They digitize the form and send that form to the BPO in a digital format. So this is done. Then BPO supervisor, on receiving the digital copy of the fax, forwards the email to agent for processing. I am the manager in BPO. I get all those forms from the customer, Etna, and I forward those forms to the selected agents in my team. Agents access the digital copy of the fax form in their email account. Agents then process the request using MEA application and GEMS application or BEER application. These applications are hosted and they maintain it. On completion of the request, BPO supervisor or agent securely deletes the cardholder information from their email of the agent and confirm the deletion to the Etna through email. So here the agents are acting as a data entry operator. So a fax form comes to Etna. Etna sends that form to a supervisor in BPO. The BPO supervisor receives that form, sends it to the agent. Agent open that file, enter those details into the application. The supervisor come and delete that email from the agent mailbox once the work is done. After deleting the email, the supervisor confirm the deletion to the Etna. Clear?
Yes, Paras.
In the BPO agent receives the inbound customer call and uses the MEA application to view the customer profile. Agent then asks for the card number and details for the policy renewal or the profile update request. Agent enters the cardholder information directly into the GEMS or the BEER application. These applications are again managed by Etna. BPO agent use a manual record on demand feature of variant call recorder for bleeping the information in the recorded call. The agent gets the card hold. So the customer of Etna calls this BPO for the purposes of a policy renewal. The agent of this BPO takes the card number, card expiration date, and the CVV number from the calling customer. They put that information into an application. The application takes that card detail, makes a transaction, and gives a confirmation to this agent that the processing is successful. And that's all about it. Now, during when the call is getting recorded, the BPO agent, they uses a manual record on demand feature. In earlier case, we have looked at a NICE as a call recorder option. Here it's a variant call recorder software or a variant calling software. That's another, I would say, brand of the call recording company. So the agent uses a variant call recorder, and there is a manual record on demand feature wherein the customer can push a button, soft button, to stop the recording or to bleep the recording. Bleeping is like toong. So that's a bleeping. Okay. So agent can press a button, a toong can happen, and then again presses a button and the bleeping will stop. Okay, so in the recording of the call, if anybody else listens to that conversation, they will not hear the complete number, but they will hear a bleep sound there. Okay, so that's what is an inbound customer call process.
Okay.
Okay, clear? And then there is another AT&T process, which is again same like a BPO in inbound calling itself.
Okay.
Clear?
Yes, Paras.
So these are the business processes. So this is what we have done. We have looked at the business processes, and based on the business processes, we have verified whether the cardholder data is involved into that process or not. If yes, then what is the scope of that card data? So what kind of card data is being taken, where it is getting stored, who all have access to that card data physically, who all have access to the card data logically as well. So that's something that we take a look at, a business description. So when we start an audit, the first set of team that we interact with are the business team. So we sit with the business POC or a point of contact, and then we discuss the business process with them. So we ask them, what do you do? So they say, we support the customer. Which customer? We support A, B, C, D customer. What support do you provide? So I provide them a, let's say, inbound process support. What kind of information do you take? I take the card information. Why do you take the card information? To renew the policy. Okay. So there's a cardholder information involved for the renewal of the policy in this particular process. So we take a note of it. Okay. So similarly, we keep on discussing the business processes with them. Once we discuss the business process, next thing we do is we ask them to show us how this business runs in reality. So we go to the floor along with them. We sit with one of the agents, and we headset so that we hear the conversation, and we hear the conversation between the customer and the agent. Based on that, we take certain notes. We look at the application, what kind of app, so what all applications the agent is using on their workstation. So we take a note of those applications as well. So once we are done with that, we come to our meeting room. We discuss whatever notes that we have taken. We discuss those notes with the business POC. We document our understanding in a simple English. So we document our understanding in a simple English, send that understanding to the business POC. Business POC confirms us that yes, your understanding is correct or wrong. Once that is correct, then we look at the IT side. Before that, we do not touch the IT. Clear?
Yeah, understood. Yes.
Perfect. So that's how we define the business scope as well. So this is something we covered. We covered this. We covered scope as well. And that's pretty much about it for today's session. I hope this is going well, Nikita. And like I said, any point in time, if we feel I have to speed up or speed down, please feel free to interrupt and let me know about it.
Sure, Paras. It's going good, and I'll just follow the recording once again, and I'll just read everything. If I have any doubts,
Sure.
I'll get back to you in the next class.
Sure.
Okay, Paras. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you,
Parnika.
Parnika.